Falcon Ridge airfield sat like a rusting relic on the edge of the western plateau, where the wind blew dry and hot year-round, and the horizon shimmered like molten glass under the sun. Once, this place had been a jewel in the crown of aerial defense, home to the Sky Talon unit, an elite squadron whose pilots flew faster, sharper, and braver than anyone else in the service. But the squadron was disbanded in 2011 after budget cuts and shifting priorities. Since then, Falcon Ridge had faded into obscurity, reduced to a skeleton crew of logistics officers, mechanics, and admin clerks. The airfield's only sound most days was the groan of ancient hangar doors in the wind, the occasional cough of a maintenance truck, or the low drone of a weather station fan that hadn't been replaced in decades. The main runway had grass sprouting through its cracks, and the massive radar dish on the north tower only spun when a technician remembered to run a system check. Among the small group who kept the place functioning was Elara Vance, a quiet woman in her early 40s with skin weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that seemed older than her years. Officially, she was an electrical systems contractor, hired to keep the power grid from collapsing and the communications network from falling silent. She arrived before dawn every morning in an old tan pickup, her hair tied back in a plain knot, her coveralls smelling faintly of engine oil and desert dust. She kept her head down, spoke little, and worked with an efficiency that made others both grateful and slightly uneasy. To the younger soldiers, she was simply the wire lady. They'd see her crouched under breaker panels, tightening bolts on junction boxes, or hauling thick cable spools down corridors without asking for help. She didn't eat in the mess hall. She didn't linger to chat. And she never seemed to tire, no matter how long the day ran. One sergeant had once joked, "If you see Vance coming, something's about to blow." The others laughed, and the nickname stuck, Trouble in Coveralls. No one asked where she came from. No one thought to. Her personnel file was barebones, a contracting firm's name, a clean work history, nothing to hint at a life before Falcon Ridge. Only Chief Warrant Officer Darren Holt, a grizzled man in the records office, sometimes looked at her with a faint crease between his brows. Like there was a memory he couldn't quite bring into focus. One late afternoon, while returning from a job in the underground power tunnels, Elara paused by Hangar 3. Inside sat the XF-27 Vindicator, a sleek, dust-covered fighter with a shark-like nose and folded wings. It hadn't flown in over a decade. She stood in the doorway longer than she meant to, her gaze tracing the curve of its fuselage like one might study an old photograph of someone they'd loved. From behind her, a voice barked, "Hey, hey! Civilian area! You're not authorized to be here." She turned slowly. A young MP, barely out of training, puffed out his chest like he was confronting a spy. "Yes, Sergeant," she said calmly, her tone flat, unreadable. She stepped away from the hangar without another word, boots clicking softly on the concrete. The MP watched her go, feeling oddly unsettled, though he couldn't have said why. That night, the desert wind moaned against the hangars, and the radar dish stood still in the moonlight, as if the airfield itself were holding its breath for something it couldn't name. The next morning broke like any other, a pale gold sunrise bleeding across the plateau, the air dry enough to crack lips. Elara's truck rattled through the gate at 5:12, headlights cutting through the low desert haze. The guard gave her the usual half-distracted wave without even glancing at her ID. She drove past the empty parade ground, the sun catching on the faded white letters painted across the asphalt, "Sky Talon Forever." The paint had chipped so badly that the slogan looked like it had been erased by time itself. Inside the maintenance bay, Elara worked in silence, stripping the corroded insulation from a length of high-voltage cable. Sparks flared briefly from the junction box before she coaxed the circuit back to life with the same care one might use to wake a sleeping animal. "Coffee?" a voice asked from the doorway. She glanced up to see Chief Holt holding a mug, steam curling from the rim. He was one of the few people on base who ever tried to speak to her without a work order in hand. "I'm fine," she said. "You ever think about what this place used to be?" he asked, stepping inside. His voice had that slow, deliberate quality of a man turning something over in his head. Pilots coming and going at all hours. Engines screaming day and night. People said you could hear Falcon Ridge from 20 miles out when the Talons were running drills. Elara only shrugged, winding the cable neatly into place. I imagine things change. He studied her for a moment. Some things do. Some don't. Before she could respond, a sharp buzz cracked through the air, rattling the old fluorescent lights. Not the low, lazy klaxon that signaled a fire drill or weather warning. This was a sound few on base had ever heard. It wasn't just loud. It was urgent. Piercing. The kind of alarm that reached straight into the spine and twisted. Level 1 alert! Holt muttered, his mug halfway to the floor. In the corridors outside, soldiers froze mid-step. Conversations died. Boots began pounding in the direction of the command center. Elara set her tools down and followed without haste, but without hesitation either, moving through the growing chaos. The command center was already a storm of activity. A junior radar tech's voice cracked as he called out readings. For unidentified fast movers, bearing 240, speed Mach 2.3. Range 31 nautical miles and closing. Lieutenant Barris, the acting base commander, leaned over the radar scope, knuckles white. Tell me this is some kind of exercise. No, sir, the tech said, panic edging into his voice. No scheduled flights, no friendly codes, no response to challenge pings. The air seemed to thicken as the reality settled in. Falcon Ridge had no active squadron. The only pilots here were retired instructors doing paperwork, and even they hadn't flown a live mission in years. Barris turned sharply to the room. Do we have anyone at all, who can get an airframe off the ground in the next 10 minutes? The silence was almost as loud as the alarm. Heads shook. Eyes dropped. And in that silence, Chief Holt's gaze slid slowly toward Elara. The command center buzzed with frantic voices, radios squawking overlapping chatter from the perimeter watch. Someone was cursing at a communications console that refused to link to Regional Defense HQ. The smell of overheated electronics and too many bodies in one room hung in the air. Elara stayed near the back wall, her arms folded loosely, watching the green sweep of the radar arm with the same calm she used when diagnosing a faulty relay. Sir, enemy craft are now at 23 nautical miles. The radar tech called, his voice climbing an octave. Estimated 4 minutes to weapons range. Lieutenant Barris swore under his breath. We don't even have intercept capability on standby. Where the hell did these guys come from? Probably doesn't matter. Someone muttered from the intel desk. They're coming straight for us. Chief Holt shifted closer to Elara. Vance. She didn't look at him. You've been here, what, 6 years? 7, she corrected softly. He tilted his head, studying her profile. You never talk about before. Not once. Her gaze remained on the radar scope, unblinking. Because it's not relevant to the work I do now. Funny, Holt said, his voice low enough not to carry. I saw you in Hangar 3 the other day. Staring at the Vindicator like it was an old friend. That thing's been mothballed since before you got here. Most folks wouldn't know what they were even looking at. Before she could answer, a breathless corporal rushed in clutching a cracked plastic case. Sir, I found this while pulling old pilot records from storage. Thought it might have something, anything useful. Barris snatched it from him, flipping the latch. Inside lay a faded military ID, the plastic warped from years of heat. The name was stamped in block letters, Vance, Elara J. Rank, Commander. Unit Sky Talon. Status, Missing in Action, 2010. The room went still. Holt's eyes widened as if a puzzle piece had just clicked into place after a decade. My God, he whispered. Blackhawk Canyon. You were in the Blackhawk operation. Every face in the room turned toward her. Even the radar tech mid-scan stopped to stare. Elara's expression didn't change. She only said in a voice that carried despite its quietness. Where's Hangar 3 keycard access? Barris blinked. You're telling me you can fly that death trap? I'm telling you, she said, stepping forward with a steadiness that made the chaos around her seem almost staged. "That if you want anyone alive here in 20 minutes, you open that hangar right now." Barris hesitated for a heartbeat too long. Then the alarm blared again, shriller now, a mechanical scream demanding action. "Sergeant Klein," he barked. "Get hangar 3 open. Holt, you're with them. Move." The 3 of them strode down the corridor, boots hammering against the concrete floor. Overhead lights flickered from the strain on the base's aging power grid. Through a narrow window, Elara caught a glimpse of the horizon, 4 faint silver streaks, sunlight glinting off their fuselages as they tore across the morning sky. Klein fumbled with his access badge at the hangar's heavy steel door. The lock clunked reluctantly, and with a deep groan, the panel rolled upward to reveal the XF-27 Vindicator. Dust lay thick across its swept wings, muting the dark blue paint to a dull gray. The cockpit canopy was clouded from years of neglect, and a bird's nest sat precariously inside the right engine intake. Elara's eyes softened just slightly. "You held together, didn't you?" she murmured. Klein raised an eyebrow. "You talked to planes?" "Only the ones worth listening to." She stepped forward, stripping off her grease-stained outer coveralls in a single motion to reveal a flight suit beneath, faded, patched at the knees, but meticulously cared for. On the shoulder was an old Sky Talon insignia, the stitching worn thin. Holt stared. "You kept that under there all these years." "Didn't see a reason to throw it away," she replied, already climbing onto the maintenance ladder. Her hands moved with methodical precision, tapping each control surface, running her fingers along the leading edges of the wings, checking hydraulic lines by touch. She popped open a side panel and began flipping breakers in a specific sequence. The Vindicator's systems coughed, stuttered, then roared faintly to life. Klein stepped back, watching in something like awe. "Nobody here knows how to cold start one of these anymore." Elara didn't look up from the console. "Nobody remembers because they haven't had to. Memory fades when you think you're safe." The auxiliary power unit kicked on, bathing the hangar in a low mechanical hum. Dust motes swirled through the sunlight streaming from a high window. Holt swallowed. "You sure you can still do this?" Her reply was steady, almost serene. "Flying's like breathing. You can stop for a while, but when you start again, your body remembers exactly how it's done." Outside, the roar of approaching jets grew louder. The hangar doors groaned as the massive steel panels began to part, sunlight pouring in like a spotlight. Outside, runway 2 stretched toward the shimmering horizon, cracked, faded, and littered with sand drifts from years of neglect. Over the comms, Barris's voice crackled in. "Hostiles at 16 nautical miles. Estimated 2 minutes until they're in strike range." "Copy," Elara replied, her voice calm enough to make Holt glance at her twice. Klein sprinted ahead to clear debris from the centerline, while 2 mechanics scrambled to disconnect ground power cables. The Vindicator's twin engines coughed, spat black smoke, then settled into a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the hangar floor. Holt leaned toward her cockpit, shouting over the noise. "Once you're airborne, you'll have no AWACS support, no radar uplink, nothing but onboard systems. Those birds out there are running in tight formation. You're outnumbered and outgunned." Elara tightened her harness, fingers dancing over the controls. Not the first time. Her HUD flickered to life, data streams scrolling across the glass. The targeting system showed faint blips in the distance, 4 rapidly approaching dots, their vectors converging on Falcon Ridge. The base loudspeakers barked. "All personnel clear runway 2. Repeat, clear runway 2. On the tarmac, soldiers who had never seen a live scramble before stood frozen in place, watching the scene as if it were from another era. The sound of the engines built into a screaming crescendo, rattling the windows of nearby buildings. Elara's voice cut in over the base frequency. "Control, Vindicator 1 is rolling." The brakes released. The aircraft surged forward, wheels bouncing over uneven patches of asphalt. The acceleration pressed her back into the seat, the old airframe shuddering as if waking from a long, reluctant sleep. Past 80 knots. 110. 140. The runway flashed beneath her. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick. The Vindicator's nose lifted, and for the first time in 13 years, Falcon Ridge Airfield saw a fighter rise into the desert sky. Inside the command center, all chatter ceased as they watched her silhouette climb against the sun. "God help her," Barris murmured. Up in the cockpit, Elara's eyes narrowed behind her visor. "All right," she said to no one but herself. "Let's see if I still remember how to dance." The Vindicator climbed steadily, the sky shifting from desert gold to the deep, unbroken blue of the upper atmosphere. Elara leveled out at 25,000 feet, the hum of the engines smoothing into a steady, predatory purr. Her HUD painted the 4 hostile aircraft as crimson triangles moving fast across the scope. The onboard threat computer spat warnings in clipped, mechanical tones, multiple bogies. Supersonic. Armed. She adjusted her heading, slipping into their projected intercept path. The desert floor fell away beneath her, its pale expanse broken only by the jagged black scars of canyons and dry riverbeds. "Vindicator 1, this is Falcon Ridge Command." Barris's voice came over the comms, taut with strain. "You are now the only intercept asset within 500 miles. Say again, you are alone out there." "Copy," Elara replied. "Just keep the runway warm." At 20 miles out, she cut her afterburners and eased the throttle back. The Vindicator bled speed, slipping into the broken shadows of a high-altitude cloud bank. Her radar cross-section dropped sharply, one of the old tricks she'd never forgotten. The enemy formation appeared as faint dark specks ahead, glinting briefly when the sun hit their wings. They flew tight, professional, and without hesitation. She rolled the Vindicator onto its side, scanning through the canopy. Their lead jet was larger, its engine signature hotter. A command bird. The other 3 were smaller, faster, built for close-range strike. She keyed the weapon system but didn't arm yet. Instead, she let the Vindicator's nose drift just behind and below the formation's flight path, where most sensors wouldn't sweep often. The old instincts came flooding back, reading air currents in the shutter of the stick, watching the angle of their contrails, feeling the rhythm of the hunt. From here, she could almost hear her old squadron leader's voice in her headset. "Patience, Vance. You get one good first move. Make it count." At 12 miles, the enemy began to fan out into attack positions. Elara's grip on the throttle tightened. "All right," she murmured under her breath. "Let's wake you up, girl." Her thumb flicked the master arm switch. The HUD lit crimson. The moment her targeting reticle locked onto the trailing strike jet, Elara squeezed the trigger. 2 missiles leapt free, smoke curling away in white ribbons before they vanished into the sky. The lead enemy formation broke instantly. The targeted jet rolled hard left, trying to shake the lock, but one missile found its mark. A flash bloomed in the distance, followed by a scattering of debris tumbling toward the desert. 3 against 1. The remaining strike craft split to flank her while the command bird hung back, its radar painting her with a constant threat tone. She shoved the throttle forward, afterburners igniting, the Vindicator leaping like a predator into the cloud layer. Missiles lanced past her canopy, close enough for the detonation shockwaves to rattle her teeth. She inverted, dove through the clouds, then rolled upright in the thin air below them, using the Vindicator's superior turning radius to snap behind one of the attackers. "Bad place to be," she muttered, sending a burst from the nose cannon into its right engine. Black smoke erupted, and the jet spiraled down, pilot ejecting a second before it hit the earth. 2 against 1. The remaining strike jet closed in fast, its pilot aggressive, pushing her into a tight corkscrew climb. The G-forces clawed at her vision, but she held it until the last second, then kicked the rudder hard and slid out of its line of fire. The enemy overshot, and she fired a single missile into its belly. The explosion turned the blue sky orange for a heartbeat. Only the command bird remained, and it was diving low, lining up for a missile strike on Falcon Ridge itself. "Not today," she said, pitching the Vindicator into a vertical climb that slammed her into her seat. The engines howled protest. She crested above the enemy's path, rolled inverted, and dove straight at it. The closure rate was suicidal, both aircraft closing at near supersonic speeds. Her targeting reticle screamed a tone of solid lock. One squeeze. One missile. The detonation lit the sky like a second sun, scattering molten fragments into the empty air. Silence. She brought the Vindicator in low over the base, the runway rushing up to meet her. The landing gear locked down with a bone-jarring clunk. She hit the deck hard, tires shrieking, airframe groaning under the stress. The engines wound down into a slow, exhausted whine. When she climbed from the cockpit, the air tasted of burnt fuel and hot metal. The entire base had gathered by the runway, watching her in a stunned, reverent silence. Barris stepped forward, helmet in hand. "Commander Vance," he said quietly. "Welcome home." She shook her head. "I was never gone. Just working a different post." Chief Holt's voice carried from somewhere in the crowd. "Guess the Sky Talons never really died." A smile, small, almost reluctant, touched her face. "The sky remembers," she said. In the weeks that followed, the base treated her differently. The salutes weren't about rank but about respect. A photo of her, helmet under one arm, was hung in the mess hall beneath a new plaque, "Silent Wing. Return to flight, 2025. She refused the offer to rejoin active command. Instead, she returned to her maintenance rounds, checking power lines, patching cables, cleaning the base flag when the wind left it dusty. One morning, Holt found a note taped to the records room door, written in her precise, blocky handwriting. "Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might be the only thing standing between you and the fire." Falcon Ridge never forgot that lesson.